It was very cold in the valley that winter. Suddenly we were all excited. Neil wanted to tell me everything he knew about Bakersfield as we reached the city limits. He showed me rooming houses where he stayed and water tanks where he jumped off the train for grapes, Chinese restaurants where he ate, park benches where he met girls, and certain places where he'd done nothing but just sit and wait around. Man, I spent hours on that chair in front of that drugstore. He remembered it all. Every pinochle game, every woman, every sad night. And suddenly we were passing the place in the rail yards where B and I had sat under the moon, drinking wine on those bum crates in October 1947. And I tried to tell him, but he was too excited. This is where Hinkle and I spent a whole morning drinking beer, trying to make a real gone little waitress from Watsonville. No, it was Tracy. Yes, Tracy. And her name was Esmeralda. Oh man, something like that. Luann was planning to do something at the moment she arrived in Frisco. Alfred said his aunt would give him plenty of money up in Tulare. The Okie directed us to his brother in the flats outside of town. We pulled up at noon in front of this little rose-covered shack. And the Okie went in, talked with some women, and we waited 15 minutes. I'm beginning to think this guy has no more money than I have, said Neil. We got more hung up. There's probably nobody in that family that'll give him a cent. The Okie came out sheepishly and directed us to town. Hot damn, I wish I could find my brother. He made inquiries. He probably felt he was our prisoner. And finally, we went to a big bread bakery, and the Okie came out with his brother, who was wearing coveralls and was apparently the truck mechanic inside. We talked with his brother a few minutes. We waited in his car. Okie was telling all his relatives his adventures and the loss of his guitar, but he got the money and he gave it to us, and we were all set for Frisco. We thanked him and we took off, and next stop was Tulare. Up the valley we roared. I lay in the back seat, exhausted, giving up completely. And sometime in the afternoon, while I dozed, the muddy Hudson zoomed by tents outside Selma, where I had lived and loved and worked in the spectral past. Neil was bent rigidly over the wheel, pounding the roads up to his hometown. Only a month ago, he had come down to this same road with Al and Helen Hinkle, bound for North Carolina. There I was in the back seat, accomplished. I was sleeping when we finally arrived in Tulare. I woke up to hear the insane details. Jack, wake up. Alfred's got his aunt's grocery store. And we found it. And what, you know what happened? His aunt shot her husband and went to jail. The store's closed down. We didn't get a cent. Think of it. The things that happen. The troubles on all sides. The wonderful events. Where? Alfred was biting his fingernails. We were turning off the Oregon Road at Madera, and there we made our farewell with little Alfred. We wished him luck and Godspeed to Oregon. He said it was the best ride he ever had. It was. He ate royally. He was at a party, at a ranch. He rode horseback. He heard stories. He felt pretty good about it, but looked awful forlorn when we put him down where we'd found him, on the side of the road with his thumb stuck out and darkness coming. We had to make it to Frisco. The golden goal loomed ahead. Neil, Luann, and I leaned forward in the front, all alone again, and zoomed. It seemed like a matter of minutes when we began rolling in the foothills before Oakland and suddenly reached a height and saw, stretched out ahead of us, the fabulous white city of San Francisco. On her 11 mystic hills, with the blue Pacific and its advancing wall of potato patch fog beyond, and smoke and goldenness in the late afternoon of time. There she blows, yelled Neil. Wow, made it. Just enough gas. Gimme water. No more land. We can't go any further 'cause there ain't no more land. Now, Luann, darling, You and Jack go immediately to a hotel and wait for me to contact you in the morning. And as soon as I have definite arrangements made with Carolyn and Funderbuck about my railroad watch, and you and Jack, by the first thing, hit town for a paper for the want ads, and he drove into Oakland Bay Ridge and it carried us in. The downtown office buildings were just sparkled on their lights. It made you think of Sam Spade. The fog rolled in. The buoys went B.O. in the bay. Market Street was a riot of crowds and sailors and girls, smells of hot dogs and food, noisy bars, screeching traffic, cable cars, and all of it so delightful. Air that made us drunk when we staggered out of the car on O'Farrell Street and sniffed and stretched. It was like getting on shore after a long voyage at sea. The sloppy street reeled under our feet. Secret chop sueys from Frisco Chinatown floated in the air. We took all our things out of the car and piled them on the sidewalk, and suddenly Neil was saying goodbye. He was bursting to see Carolyn and find out what happened. Luann and I stood dumbly in the street and watched him drive away. "You see what a bastard he is?" said Luann. "Neil will leave you out in the cold any time. It's in his interest." I know. And I looked back east, and I sighed. We had no money. Neil hadn't mentioned money. Where are we going to stay? We wandered around carrying our bundles of rags in the narrow, romantic streets. Everybody looked like a broken-down movie extra. A withered starlet, disenchanted stuntmen, midget auto racers, poignant California characters with their end-of-the-continent sadness, handsome, decadent, Casanova-ish men, puffy-eyed motel blondes, hustlers, pimps, whores, masseurs, bellhops, a lemon lot. And how's a man going to make a living with a gang like that? Nevertheless, Luann had been around these people. This is O'Farrell and Powell and thereabouts, and a gray-faced hotel clerk let us have a room on credit. That was the first step. Then we had to eat, and didn't do so till midnight when we found a nightclub singer in our hotel room who turned an iron upside down on a coat hanger in the wastebasket and warmed up a can of pork and beans. And I looked out the window at the winking neons, and I said to myself, where is Neil? And why isn't he concerned about our welfare? I lost faith in him that year. It was our last meet, no more. I stayed in San Francisco a week and had the beatest time of my life. Luann and I walked around for miles looking for food money, even visited some drunken seamen in a flop house on Mission Street that she knew, and they offered us whiskey in the hotel where we lived together for 2 days. I realize now that Neil was out of sight. Luann had no real interest in me. She was trying to reach Neil through me, his buddy, and we had arguments in the hotel room. And we also spent entire nights in bed, and I told her my dreams, and I told her about the big snake of the world that was coiled in the earth like a worm in an apple that would someday nudge up a hill to be thereafter known as Snake Hill and fold out upon the plain 50 miles long and devouring it as it went along. And I told her this snake was Satan. "What's going to happen?" she squealed. Meanwhile, she held me by the cock. "A saint called Dr. Sachs will destroy it with secret herbs, which he is at this very moment cooking up in his underground shack somewhere in America." It may also be disclosed that the snake is just a husk of doves. When the snake dies, great clouds of seminal gray doves will flutter out and bring tidings of peace around the world. I was out of my mind with hunger and bitterness. One night, Luann disappeared with a nightclub owner. I was waiting by appointment in a doorway across the street at Larkin and Geary, hungry, when she suddenly stepped out of the foyer of the fancy apartment house with her girlfriend, the nightclub owner, and a greasy old man with a roll. Originally, she'd just gone in to see her girlfriend. I saw what a horse she was. She was afraid to give me the sign. Though she saw me in that engaged doorway, She walked on little whore feet and got in the Cadillac, and off they went. And now I had nobody, nothing. I walked around picking butts from the street. I passed a fish and chip joint on Market Street, and suddenly the woman in there gave me a terrified look as I passed. She was the proprietress, and she apparently thought I was coming in there with a gun to hold up the joint. I walked on a few feet. It suddenly occurred to me that this was my mother of 150 years ago in England, and that I was her footpad son returning from gaol to haunt her honest labors in the hashery. I stopped frozen with ecstasy on the sidewalk. I looked down Market Street. I didn't know whether it was that or Canal Street in New Orleans. It led to water, ambiguous, universal water, just like 42nd Street in New York leads to water, and you never know where you are. I thought of Al Hinkle's ghost on Times Square. I was delirious. I wanted to go back and leer at my strange Dickensian mother in the hash joint. I tingled all over from head to foot. It seemed I had a whole host of memories leading back to 1750 in England, and that I was in San Francisco now, only in another life and in another body. "No," that woman seemed to say with that terrified glance. "Don't come back and plague your honest, hard-working mother. You are no longer like a son to me, and like your father, my first husband, ere this kindly Greek took pity on me." The proprietor was a Greek with hairy arms. "You are no good, inclined to drunkenness, and routs with final disgraceful robbery of the fruits of my humble labors in the ashery. Oh, son, did you ever go on your knees and pray for deliverance for all your sins and scoundrels' acts? Lost boy, depart. Do not haunt my soul. I have done well forgetting you. Reopen no old wounds. Be as if you had never returned and looked into me to see my laboring humilities, my few scrubbed pennies, hungry to grab, quick to deprive, sullen, unload, mean-minded son of my flesh. Son! Son!" It made me think of the big pop Vision and Gratna with Bill. And just for a moment, I had reached the point of ecstasy that I always wanted to reach, and which was the complete step across chronological time into timeless shadows and wonderment in the bleakness of the mortal realm, and the sensation of death kicking at my heels to move on, with a phantom dogging its own heels, and myself hurrying to a plank where all the angels dove off and flew into infinity. This was the state of my mind. I thought I was going to die the very next moment. But I didn't. And walked 4 miles and picked up 10 long butts, took them back to my hotel room and poured their tobacco into my old pipe and lit it up. And that was the way Neil found me when he finally decided I was worth saving.